In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build out a full stack AI enabled platform where you'll be able to generate images and ultimately give you a starting point on what you can build on top of. I'm going to leverage some of the latest and greatest tools out there from Claude's new MCP server. We're going to be using Cursor. I'm going to be using Neon for our Postgres database. I'm going to show you how to use FAL. This is going to be where we get our image generation models and our video generation models. For the assets, whether it's videos or images, we're going to be using Tigris to be able to actually host those files. Then I'm going to show you a new release that just came out from Neon, which allows you to integrate the MCP server, which is the new Model Context Protocol from Anthropic, where if you have the Claude desktop app, you'll be able to interact with your Neon database. It's really cool because you can say, create a table, seed my table, and it's right within Claude, but it's integrating with your environment for your database. Now, in terms of the starting point, I'm going to be using this simple boilerplate Postgres on Vercel. Instead of going through and spending time showing you how to set up every little file, every little piece on where to set up Postgres and Drizzle and all of that, we're going to skip through a little bit of the minutia of setting up line by line, and we're just going to start from this as a starting point. The first thing that you can do is you can go ahead and just install the projects. I'm going to call this AI Image Studio. And then once everything's installed, we're just going to go within AI Images here. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up a workspace within Cursor for this particular directory. Once you have that set up, what we're going to do is we're going to remove this .example from the .env. And then also within the package, I'm going to go and I'm going to update the next version. If I search for next, we see that it's 13.54 here. I'm going to update it to the latest version. I'm going to install and make sure that we have that latest update there. Next, what you can do is you can make a free account on Neon. You can have up to 10 free Postgres databases on Neon completely for free. In this, I'm just going to call this one images. We're going to create this project. And then what you can do is I'm going to go ahead and turn on pooled connections here. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to close this out. And then within our .env, one little trick that I like to do when the Postgres variables are broken out like this is if you just highlight it, I'm going to Command K, and I'm just going to say update this, and I'm going to paste this in. Now, in terms of the username, password, and all of that, I'm going to be spinning this down after this video. Don't worry about any environment variables that you see in the demo. They'll ultimately be deleted. Now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and npm dev. And so within here, we can check a local host. We can just make sure that we do have what we need. We see that it did seed our database here with a little bit of information. Now, if I go on over to our tables, within the database we just set up, we have the seeded information with our users table. Now, what I want to show you is this cool new release from Neon, MCP server Neon. All that you need to set this up is you can npx neon database / MCP server neon init, and then pass in your API key. To do this, you can grab your API key, you can go to account settings, and then once you're there, you can go to API keys, you can make a new API key, and then you can paste in that command. Now, what's great with this, if you have the Claude desktop app, you can ask questions about your Neon databases. Here you see that with each command, it asks for your permission before it executes. And here we see running the get database tables from Neon. And here I said, tell me about my images database. This is the one that I just set up a moment ago in the video. And here we see, let me show you what's inside your users table. It's nesting down, it's going into the database, it's seeing that table, and it's going into the users table, and it's listing out what's within the table. Now, what I can do here, which is pretty cool, is I can say, I want to build out a image generation platform. I need a users table with their email, hashed password. I need to store their image URL, prompts, as well as date created. Also add in any other relevant information, but let's keep it's simple to start. Here we go. I'll help you design and create a database schema for your image generation platform. Let's start with two tables, the users and generations. So for storing generated images and their prompts, here we go. It's working through. Let me verify that the tables were created correctly. The great thing with this is it does set it up within branches. It has a bunch of detail about our schema, users, ID, password hash, all of that created at, and then generation, image URL, so on and so forth. Here we go. Would you like me to apply this migration to create these tables? You can take a look at what it did here. You can see that it just created this new branch. And what you can do within here, I can say, let's go and apply these changes to the main branch. All right, so I'm going to allow this. I'll commit the database migration to apply these changes to the main branch. The changes have been successfully applied. Now within our branches, we see that we just have the one branch once again. And if I go over to our tables, I see users and generations. Pretty cool. Now let's seed the tables with some data. This can obviously be helpful where if you're building out an application and let's say you want to focus on the UI portion to start to build out even the backend and reference some pieces of data, this is just helpful to have information within there that you can consume while building out different features and be able to test and all of that. Now, if we look at the tables, we have our generations and then we have our users as well. Now, another cool thing is if you haven't used Drizzle before, this is how you declare your schema. And what's great with this is it's type safe. Wherever you're using this within the application, you'll be able to see big red errors if there are any issues, like if you try and add in a number into the database that should be a string or whatever it might be. That's where Drizzle really shines. You're going to catch so many bugs this way. Let's go ahead and I'm going to say now, update all those changes to my Drizzle TS. I'll just paste that in there. And one thing I want to emphasize with AI models is context is king. This is obviously coming directly from the conversation that we were just having. And that's something that makes it perform really well. It's very succinct, the ask that we had for our request. I'm just asking, okay, take this information and update it based on what you already had. And that's something that LLMs can do exceedingly well at. Here, if I just take a look, we have our generations table. We have basically all of the different parameters within here. Now, I did see that it seeded some information with an image URL. When we do start our server, if we do have an error, I wouldn't worry about that too much. We'll ultimately add these to our next.config of where we can consume images from. Now what I'm going to do is within our page.tsx, what I'm going to say is within this, I want to be able to display the results that are within the image generation table, as well as have a simple nav and footer. I'm just going to demonstrate some pieces within one component. Now you can always break out things, and you typically would, obviously, for things like the navigation and the footer, but I'm just going to try and keep this as simple as possible. Let's take a look at our application. Now we have that storage.example issue, so we can just go within our next config here, and we can just say, add in this domain. And while we're here, we can say, allow for Tigris domains as well. And it should hopefully know the context of what the Tigris domain is. We'll go ahead and we'll accept. Let's take another look at this. It's pulling in all of the images. Now let's just set up some simple auth. Here, let's go ahead and let's try the new Composer agent feature. This can run terminal commands and it can run in a bit of a loop. It can search your code base as well. It can get the context, which is really helpful. And then here we go. I'll set up a simple authentication system. First, let's create an auth page and then modify the navigation. We see our authentication page. And then now let's create a registration page. We have auth and then we have register. And now it's going to modify the navigation just like I asked. And it says, I've set up a basic authentication system with the following features. You can register here or you can log in at auth. And then it's implemented the authentication logic using the users table schema that we have in the drizzle.ts. It's updated those pages. It's added the sign in button. Now the authentication UI is in place. Now we have to implement the authentication on the server side as well. I'm going to say yes. I want it to implement those features. I'll help you break down the authentication logic. Let's break down this into steps. So first, let's create an API route for authentication. Then we're going to add client-side form handling and then set up session management using Next.js middleware. Here we go. It's setting up some of the API routes for registration or authentication. It's also going to be leveraging JWTs where we can set the expirations. In this case, it looks like it's going to be 24 hours for the max age of the session. And it says, now let's update the login page. It's going to go and update the login page. And then it's also going to be updating the registration page. I think a lot of people do shy away from authentication, and myself included. I do like some of these hosted platforms like Clerk's a great option. There's probably a dozen other options as well within the authentication space. But at its core, authentication, it's a couple tables, a few tables, a couple pages, and just sort of tying together some of the different pieces. Maybe I'm simplifying a little bit, but ultimately it shouldn't be too bad to set up. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to accept all, I'm going to npm install. Now, the other cool thing with this composer agent is it can reference the context of what's within the terminal here. Once it installs everything, it can go ahead and generate the subsequent responses as well. You can also pop out the terminal just like that. Now that it's run through all of that, let's go ahead and test this out. We see that it is missing a library here. Let's just pmp install, and then let's just try one more time here. Let's check localhost 3004, and there we go. Let's try this out. Let's sign in. It's routing us to the auth page. Let's create a new account. Developers Digest. We'll make a password here. We'll create an account, and now we have bcrypt is also not installed. Let's pm add bcrypt. This is going to be where I say something controversial, but I actually like errors. Like errors, especially if they're descriptive, are incredibly helpful in solving whatever you need, right? As you saw, we just had to work through installing some of those libraries. Now I'm going to say, no, I don't want to save the password, at least not right now. Let's go back to our neon table. Now we have Developers Digest, and we have our password hash, we have our name. It was able to set up that registration piece. Now within this, let's go back to our page. Let's find the sign in portion. Now this is hard coded to sign in. Now that we have this, I'm going to say if a user is signed in, indicate that with their name, credits, and change the page for our app to say log out instead of log in, and reference drizzle for the values unique to that user. What we're going to do here, so we're going to modify that page. It's working through all of the different pieces. The logout API route, it's updating the main page to show the user information as well as the logout button. This new composer agent, like I've seen people say mixed things about it. I quite like it. It is something you definitely have to steer and keep your eyes on and whatnot, but it does perform pretty well, I find. It's able to update things. It's able to get context a lot better than it previously was. And here now we're going to update the user nav component. There we go. It seems to have worked. Like the UI definitely needs some work, but let's try and sign out. That worked. Sign in. If I go and I put in the password, click remember me, we'll sign in. There we go. It's pretty much all working. We have the gallery page that isn't set up yet. Also the generate new, which isn't set up yet. We have recent generation. This is across the board. Now, probably not something that we want unless you have a tier where it's like public images that you generate or something. Now let's go back, and I'm going to say, let's set up 2 pages within the navigation now, and let's set up some mock data to return from the endpoint for when a user sends in the query. One thing I like to do is, especially when you're working in Next.js, is sometimes I find if you can set up the UI and the backend and just have the rudimentary pieces working, as in you send in the request and the query and whatever schema that is for that request object. And then on the back end, you send back as well the schema, the payload of whatever is going to be coming to the client. Now, if you have those pieces worked out, it's a lot easier for the LLM to understand the subsequent pieces. If you need to add in that request to something like generating an image endpoint, you can just add in those 8 or 9 lines of code for the SDK, and then it will already have the pieces and know how to have the response be sent back and displayed to the user. So you're not trying to debug a portion when you get to that part where it might be pieces that would have been a little bit easier if you took it step by step. I'm going to go ahead and accept this here. So it's created a generate page, a gallery page, and then also the API generate. Let's take a look here. We have generate new, and let's just try this out. I'll click generate. Here we have invalid source prop. Whenever you see something like that, you just need to go over to your next config and you can just say add in, and then you can add in the domain for whatever the error was. So in this case, it's pick some, but that's going to be unique to whatever the mock data that you're using. I'm going to generate it here. And now I have our gallery here. It's generating a couple things. Since we have the navbar just in the main piece, so I'm going to say, now let's add the navbar adjacent to, and one thing that I noticed is I can't reference a folder anymore. Like I can reference files, but it doesn't seem like I can reference a folder, which I don't love. I miss that. I'm going to say adjacent to the expanding arrow, and I'll touch on why I'm doing this in a second. One thing that I've noticed with Composer and Composer Agent is that sometimes it does make these component folders in new places. And it actually did this, right? You see it made a new folder called components, and it's adding the nav bar, user nav, but I didn't want it there. I wanted it within the existing components folder. Here, it's going to remove the nav bar from the main page now that we're starting to scaffold out our application to be multi-page. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to move these out and delete components there, just so things don't get confusing and we don't have errors that we don't need to deal with. Now, generate new, if we go there, I touch this in and I type in a prompt. I'll put in test again. Now we have 7 credits remaining. We do see that it's decrementing those credits. We see that these test items are there. We also see these images are also coming in. It says your gallery. Now, if we look at the database here, for the generations of the seeded data, we see that we have these are related to different users. We have 1, 2, and 3. Now, what I'm going to say is I want the images to only show the user's images throughout the entire application. Now let's update the generate page to redirect unauthorized users. For the query to the DB, we're going to select the generations table, and then it's only going to be equal to the user's information. And then finally, now we need to create a server wrapper for the generate page to pass the user's data. It's working through a number of pieces here. And then finally, let's create the client side form component. So it's updated a ton of stuff in that request. We'll go and we'll accept that. And now we only see the user's information. And if I go to the homepage, even there, we only see what the user has generated. So we have the gallery, we have generate new. If I just say robot, we'll click generate image. Now, one thing that I don't love with the flow is it just directs you out to this new page here. But the cool thing about this is it's all working, right? We have some redundancies with the credits, like a lot of little things you can tidy up. But there's a lot of things that you can easily do to make this look better. I can go in, add in a footer. You could add in a hero area. I could say add in a hero area with a linear gradient of many colors. use framer motion to animate some text and call this developer's digest image generation. It made a footer and it made it in that component folder again that I don't wanted it. I'm going to just delete that. Now there is something called cursor rules where you can update that as well if you'd like. And that will specify potentially things like that, where you could say, keep the components adjacent to the app directory, and those will be sent in with subsequent queries and what have you. I'll update the navigation so we don't have that error. All right, there we go. We have our simple footer. We have our simple header. I'll also send in that request for that hero image to work through while we go through the next pieces. Now let's go over to FAL. FAL is really great if you haven't used them before. We're going to have to get an API key that we'll put within the .env. In terms of the model, you can just explore some of the different models here. There's a bunch. You can try them out directly within their platform as well. Now, to set this up within your own project, make sure to put in your API key just like it's shown, fal_key. You can put that within your .env just like that. And then in terms of the request, what we can do is if we go to our API and we go to our generate route, so we have our mock images here. And what I can say is use the FAL API, and then we can also go through and we can give it an example on what it returns. The output looks like this. I'll send that through. And now if I close out the composer so we can see this, now if we look at the request, I'll accept all of this so we can read it a little better. We do see a couple type errors that we'll have to work through here. It ultimately won't compile here. We have a number across the app. You can always just fix with AI just like that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pm add this FAL AI client to get that error out of the way. Now, if I go to generate new, I'm just going to say a blue car. It failed to generate the image. So we had a really descriptive error related to the cookies, where it mentioned that we should be awaiting the cookies instead of just trying to reference them like we were. Now, if I go back to our application, I say blue car, generate image. We see failed to generate image. We see that we have the status code 422. Now that we have that, let's go to our route and let's console log everything in the post request. This will help for any of the errors, starting post request, getting user, just going through all of the different pieces. We can ultimately obviously remove all of this, but it's just helpful in the initial build. Failed to generate image. We see calling FAL API with prompt test. We know it got as far as this portion here, and we see the property image URL is missing. Here I'm referencing actually an image to image model. That's my mistake. Let's go back to FAL here, and we want to sort by text to image. And here, let's just reference the Flux Schnell model. The one thing that I'm going to change is I'm just going to have the prompt instead of that. Then the image URL is going to be the result data images 0 URL. Let's try this out. Generate, test. Now we see that it is actually working though. We are getting a response back. This is where error codes are very helpful. We'll just paste this in without even any instructions. It will just know what to do here. There we go. We have prompt test. We have the FAL AI image. Now we have our generation. We have our galleries. But the thing with these images and this FAL AI URL, this isn't going to be persistent. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to set up our Tigris implementation. You can make a free account on Tigris. It's really easy to set up. Then what you can do is you can create a new bucket. Let's just call this image app. And then from here, what you can do is once you've created a new bucket, and this can really be named whatever you'd like, is you can go within the bucket, and that's going to be the string that we reference on the back end when we ultimately upload this. Now, what you'll have to do is get your access key. So you can create the access key, and then once you've enabled access to the bucket that you want to give permissions to, Make sure you go to editor just to give permissions. And generally, it's best practice to only give permissions to what you need to give permissions to. And then from there, you can just copy in the environment variables within your .env. From there, what we can do is within the generation route here, so we see where we're adding the value to create that record. And then we're setting and decrementing the number of credits that the user has. Now, what we can do is we can add that image response back, this URL, to Tigris. Within here, I'm going to say add in the AWS S3 SDK and upload the image response to my Tigris bucket with the name of image app. I'll submit that. It's going to go through the route here. We're going to be installing a couple things here. We'll just pnpm add, we'll add AWS SDK, and then we'll also bun add UUID. All right, and there we go. So we have our bucket, which is essentially like a directory within the cloud. So you could use AWS, you can use Tigris, you could use like blob storage or whatever you want really for here. We have the key. Now the key is going to be generated. It's going to have that unique value. So that cryptographic hashed value is going to be the .png, and it's going to be within the generations folder. And then in terms of the body, so we're going to get the buffered response once we fetch the URL. We actually have to not just have the URL, we actually have to get the raw payload. That's why we're subsequently making that request, because we're going to be passing that in within the body and specifying that it's a .png. So that's the main piece with this. Let's just make sure that this is all working. I'll go over, we'll open up our application again. Now, if I go to generate new, let's just say a blue car will generate, failed to generate image. We have access denied. If we just scroll up and see where this is coming from, access denied. Now, if we go back to our image and I just say hello world, I'll submit that. And hopefully we have the image. And now we see this is great. This is what we want to see. That is an error that we like, because we can just go and I can specify to add in the S3 bucket to be able to access it. And then we have hello world. We do see that there is a bit of a potential issue there. So not found. Now, if we go over to Tigris and we go over to image generations, we do see hello world. That image is there, but there is another issue here. It's not allowing us to get this image, and that's in part because of the permissions. When we generate the image, I have to allow this to be pre-signed. If I just specify I need the image to be pre-signed for this user, for the user to be the only one to access it. So here we can request a pre-signer. And if we go through what it's working through, so when we generate the key here, what we can do is, instead of just generating the unique cryptographic value, is we can also put the user ID. And then for the metadata, we can specify within the metadata of the object that we're storing in Tigris that that's going to be related to that user. And then when we go and we put it up, we can get a pre-signed URL, and then we can specify when it expires. Let's just try this out again. Let's generate new. Let's say hello world. We'll go to generate image. We do need it pre-signed just like that. I'm just going to go ahead and pnpm add. We'll add that in. Now we just have to add in the Tigris domain here. I'll accept that. And if we go back to our application here, we do see the blue car. This is what a pre-signed URL is. And this is really, in essence, important for the security aspect of this, because you only want users to access what they have access to. By putting a namespace within Tigris for a user, so it's only going to be the specific user, and then we also have that cryptographic hash that's going to ensure that it's only pre-signed to that particular user. Now you can play around with the expiry date and what have you, but that's just something to be mindful of. All right, obviously, there's a bit of UI work that you can do here, but in essence, I just wanted to show you how you can leverage some of these new AI technologies on how you can make authentication easier, how you can build out and integrate the front end to the back end, being able to leverage things like Neon, being able to leverage things like Tigris. If you're thinking about building out an application that involves those different pieces, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming setting up an application like this that does have a number of pieces. But I just wanted to show you how you could leverage AI to build out an application pretty quickly, right? From end to end, we did authentication from scratch using Neon. We leveraged FAL AI models, and you could further build on this to maybe have a drop down of different models or what have you. We have a gallery. We also have it segmented out for different users. Different users won't be able to access what other users have access. There won't be those clashes. Here's just another account, for instance. You don't see any of the other users' information like we initially did. If I just say hello world, we basically have an application that needs a paint job, but effectively works, right? From this point, it has credits set up. You could set up Stripe if you want and start charging for something like this. You could just prompt a little bit further, give it a little bit of a paint job, add some UI magic towards it. I just wanted to show you a really quick one on how you could build out a simple little application where you can leverage using some of these state-of-the-art models as well as combining some of the core pieces out there. In this video, I just really wanted to do a bit of a high-level overview, exploring some of the capabilities of these models as well as dev tools, all the while hopefully showing you some pieces on how you can consider building out an application, whether it's with Neon, whether it's with Tigris, Next.js, FAL AI, using Cursor, or something like the model context protocol that's built within Anthropic's Claude. I hope you found this video useful and you learned a tip or trick or two. But otherwise, that's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one.